So this is the lesson for 14-2. What we're dealing with today are properties of numbers. There's about, I'd say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, maybe roughly about 12 to 13 different properties that you just have to memorize for the Regents exam. So when you take a look at this slide, the first property is called the commutative property of addition, and you have it of multiplication. Commutative switches the order. Over here, write the word order, please. Commutative property switches the order of what you're doing. So you only have the commutative property of addition and multiplication because if you think about it, you could switch the order of those numbers and it gives you the same answer. You could have the commutative property of addition being A plus B or B plus A. If you think about it, if you had, like, for example, 4 plus 1. 4 plus 1 is the same exact thing as 1 plus 4. It gives you 5 and it gives you 5. You can switch the order in addition. Commutative property of multiplication, same thing. You could have 2 times 3 equals 3 times 2. All right, we're switching the order. So commutative property switches the order. Associative property. You have the associative property of addition and the associative property of multiplication. Associative property switches the grouping. Associative property switches the grouping. So notice that you have to do what's inside the parentheses first. Here we're doing what's inside the parentheses B plus C first. Here we're doing A plus B first. No matter which way you do it, you'll end up with the same answer, but we're just doing this first compared to this. We do the same thing with the multiplication. Here we're multiplying B times C first. Here we're multiplying A times B first. Here's how I like to remember it. All right, here's how I like to remember it. When I was in 8th grade and I learned the same exact thing, this is how I remembered it. I made up a word for myself and I'll never forget it. Coag. Does coag make any sense? Have you ever heard the word coag? No, that's just how I made it up. All right. Commutative switches the order. Associative switches the grouping. If you can remember that, it's a very easy way to remember the difference between them. Commutative switches the order. Associative switches the grouping. Coag. All right. The next one is the distributive property. Now you're very, very used to doing the distributive property and doing like 2 times x plus 1 equals, and then you distribute so that we get 2x plus 2. This is essentially doing the same thing, except it's written out in letter form. So if you think about this, this A is the same thing as this 2. So we are distributing and distributing. We're doing A times B, which is A times B, and then we're doing A times C, A times C. And we're adding together those two things. Now, sometimes they're very generic. Sometimes they just say the distributive property. Other times they specifically say the distributive property of multiplication over addition, or sometimes they say the distributive property of multiplication over subtraction. If we had one that looked like this instead, this would be a multiplication over subtraction, because we'd be doing 2 times x and 2 times 1, but we're doing -1, so this would be a -2. So sometimes they're very specific, sometimes they're very general. You have to pay attention. If they do the over addition or over subtraction, make sure you're matching up the correct one with the correct signs. All right. The next ones are identity. I like to say that the identity is yourself. All right. If you think about your personal identity, your identity is yourself. All right. Your identity is yourself. So the identity, if you're trying to get yourself in the end, all right, what number can you add to something to get yourself? All right. Well, if we take a number like 4 and we add 0 to it, what are we going to get? You're going to get the number that you started off with. All right. So your identity is yourself. you're looking to get yourself in the end, all right? The additive identity, and this is going to be a very specific question on your quiz. The additive identity is 0. If you add 0 to anything, you will always get yourself. Multiplicative identity, right? I know that's a big word. Multiplicative identity. Multiplicative means multiply. Multiplicative identity, what number can you multiply by something to get yourself? Well, you can multiply that by 1. For example, if we had 8 times 1, 8 times 1 is 8. You get yourself in the end. So your identity is yourself. The additive identity is 0. That's a quiz question next week. The multiplicative identity is 1. That's a quiz question next week. All right? Because if you add 0 to something, you get yourself. If you multiply by 1, you get yourself. Additive inverse and multiplicative inverse. Inverse is sort of like reverse. And if you think about reverse in a car, all right, if you go in reverse, what are you doing? You're going the opposite way that you're normally going. So inverse is sort of like reverse, which is sort of like the opposite. Inverse is like reverse, which is like the opposite. So if we start off with A, let's say A is 4. If we take the opposite of 4 and add it, what are we going to get? Well, if we have 4 plus -4, that gives you 0. So we're adding and we're adding opposites. Whenever you add the opposite to a number, you will get 0. Multiplicative inverse, this one's a little bit weird. I don't know if you've heard this word before or not, but the word reciprocal. The word reciprocal is sort of like the opposite, except you flip a number, right? You flip a number. So reciprocal, you flip a number. So this starts off as whenever we have a number by itself, it's really over 1. Well, we want to multiply it, hence multiplicative, by the opposite. So if we have 5 over 1, for example, all right, I'm going to go over here. If we have 5 over 1, for example, the opposite of 5 over 1 is 1 over 5. We want to multiply by the reciprocal. When we do that, top times top, bottom times bottom, we get 5 over 5, which is just 1. So we're multiplying by the opposite. So we're adding by the opposite and multiplying by the opposite. The next one is the multiplicative property of 0. Anytime that you multiply any number at all by 0, what is the answer? It's always going to give you 0. So we could take any number like 8, multiply it by 0, and we'll always get 0. This is a slide that you're going to want to go back to, all right? This is something that you just have to memorize, all right? There's no other way to deal with it. It's just something you have to memorize. But my big suggestion, please remember coag, all right? The most common ones that they like to ask, especially on the Regents exam, are commutative and associative. That's the most common ones they like to ask. So how we like to sort of teach this is doing a matching, all right, doing a matching. Now you'll notice that there's a couple little things in this that are a little bit different. Notice that we have choice A. Choice A says combine like terms. Combining like terms is like adding 2x and 3x together to be 5x. Is that really a property? Not so much. All right, but it's sort of included in here. Notice that we have distributive property of multiplication over subtraction, and we have distributive property of multiplication over addition. So you have to pay attention to which one is which. Now, I'm going to give you this one because I'm going to have you try this on your own, but I'm going to give you letter F because this one we really don't see a lot. distributive property of division over subtraction. That's actually what this one is right here. So for number 11, write in F. F is distributive property of division over subtraction. Notice how we have 15 minus 3 all over 4, and we just sort of split it. All right, we split it to be 15 over 4 minus 3 over 4. We don't really see that one too often. I wouldn't really worry about that. That one won't be, that one won't be on your quiz, and I wrote F instead of H. That was my bad. No, I did write the right thing. Hold on. I wrote the wrong thing. I crossed off the wrong thing. There we go. All right, go ahead and try that one on your own. See if you can match up the correct answers. It's probably easiest to look at the ones on the left and match up what you think it is on the right, rather than trying to look at the right and find it.
Some sort of question on the first two.
They give you about 30 more seconds. If you don't get done, that's okay. All right, let's take a look at these. If you're not done, that's okay. If you take a look at number 1, notice that we have a number outside the parentheses and then inside parentheses. We don't have anything over here. What we're doing is the distributive property. So we have distributive property and we have adding. So this is distributive property of multiplication over addition. So this one is H. In number 2, we are going from a 6x minus x to a 5x. Well, what are we really doing there? The letters are on the same side of the equal sign, and we're combining our like terms. This one is A. In question number 3, notice what we're doing. We have 8x to minus 3x minus 6. But then we have the two x's and then the two plain numbers. So what we're really doing is switching around the order of things. We're switching around the order and we're adding. So this would be choice J, commutative property of addition. In question number 4, this one is a little bit more difficult. They didn't put the parentheses there, but if you're going from left to right, there's technically an invisible set of parentheses there. So they're moving the parentheses from around the 13 and 11 to the parentheses around the 11 and the 4. So this is going to be choice K. This is the associative property of addition. In this one, they're changing the grouping again. They're changing what's inside the parentheses, and we're multiplying this time. So this one is choice G, associative property of multiplication. In number 6, we're multiplying and we're switching the order. 3x times 5, 5 times 3x. This is choice B, commutative property of multiplication. In question number 7, you're taking the number outside the parentheses and multiplying by both of the things inside the parentheses. Therefore, we're distributing and we're doing multiplication and subtraction. Multiplication and subtraction is choice C. In number 8, we're adding 0 to a number. Since we're adding 0 to a number, that is the additive identity, which is choice D. Number 9, we're adding the opposite, all right? We're adding the inverse. So this is the additive inverse, which is choice E. This one, they don't show the 14 being over 1, but you know that anytime that there's a number all by itself, it is really over 1. So 14 over 1 times its opposite, we're flipping it. That is the multiplicative inverse, choice I. And then we're multiplying by 1, getting itself. And so that is choice L. Flip the page over. This is a very, very common multiple choice question on the Regents exam as well. All right, what they ask you to do is from steps 1 to 2, what property are you using? From step 2 to 3, what property are you using? From step 3 to 4, what property are you using? So when we look from step 1 to 2, how are we going from 4 plus, instead of 5 times in parentheses x plus 7, how are we getting to 5x plus 35? What are we doing when we go from that to that? What are we doing? What is it called when we have the parentheses and we multiply? Distributive, all right? We're doing the distributive property. We're going 5 times x and 5 times 7. So from step 1 to step 2, we are using the distributive property. How do you get from step 2 to step 3? Well, you have to look at the changes from step 2 to step 3. Notice what's changing. We have 4 plus 5x, but then they switch it around to be 5x plus 4. What are we switching? We're doing the commutative property because we're switching the order. All right, it's going from 4 plus 5x to 5x plus 4. So we're doing the commutative property of, now is it of multiplication or of addition? Addition. Now, if there was a subtracting there, if it said 4 minus 5x and negative 5x plus 4, that would still be of addition. Adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting a positive. So it's only of addition or multiplication. You're never going to have of subtraction. And then how are we getting from step 3 to step 4? Right? What are we doing here? Well, this one's a little bit harder to see. Technically, going from left to right, we would do this calculation first. And now they're putting parentheses around the 4 plus 35. So we're switching the group. Therefore, from step 3 to step 4, this is the associative property of addition. Let's take a look at the middle one. So again, in the middle one, how do we get from step 1 to step 2? Our 7x's are the same, our plus sign is the same, our 4 is the same, but they're going from this to this. They're going from 3 times 2x minus 7 to 6x plus 21. What are we doing here? We are distributing. So this is the distributive property. To get from step 2 to step 3, we have a 7x, 7x. So that's the same. But it looks like we're switching around the 4 and the negative 6x. The order is changing here, right? The order is changing around there. Since the order is changing, that is the commutative property again. Commutative property of addition. And then what is happening here at the end, all right, they're taking and they're putting parentheses around this part, specifically parentheses around that part. Normally you would go from left to right, but now they want you to do this part first and then this. So they're putting things into groups. Anytime it goes into groups, that is the associative property. And more specifically, the associative property of addition, because we're adding and subtracting. Go ahead and try this third one, please. Go ahead and try that third one, please. All right, who thinks they know what we're doing from step 1 to step 2? Oh, what do you think? The distributive property. We're taking this number outside and multiplying by both of the things inside to go from 4 times x plus 3 to 4x plus 12. So we are doing the distributive property. And then what are we doing from step 2 to step 3, Joe? What do you think? Yeah, we're doing the commutative property. We have the 4x, 4x, but then we're switching around the order right there. We have 12 minus 5x and negative 5x plus 12. So this is the commutative property, and it's of addition. All right, of addition. One last slide. Go ahead and try this matching on your own again. Go ahead and try this matching on your own again. Again, I would suggest the easier way to do this is to look at the things on the left, figure out what property it is, and then find the property in the list over to the right.
Yeah.
Gonna give you about 30 more seconds or so. So when we take a look at question number 1, 4, 5, 6, 6, 4, 5, we are switching around the order of things and we're adding, so that would be choice B, commutative property of addition. We're multiplying by 0, multiplicative property of 0, choice I. 2, this is technically 2 over 1 times 1 over 2. We're multiplying by the reverse of it or the opposite of it, and multiplicative inverse, which is called the reciprocal. So that would be choice D. 4 times 2, 2 times 4. We're switching the order and we are multiplying. So that would be choice F, commutative property of multiplication. We are changing what's inside the parentheses, what's inside the group, and we're adding. Changing what's inside the group is the associative property of addition. Multiplying by 1, you're getting yourself in the end. So that is your identity. Your identity is yourself, and we're multiplying. So that is the multiplicative identity. This one's sort of a little bit weird because they sort of wrote it backwards. But what we're actually doing here is the distributive property. 6 times 7 is 42. 6 times negative a is negative 6a or minus 6a. So that would be G. 5 plus 0 equals 5. We're starting with 5, ending with 5. We're getting ourselves in the end. So that would be choice A. And then we're changing the group and we're multiplying. That is associative property of multiplication. On your class kick today,